Welcome to the Young Decatur podcast, where we discuss various topics and how to respond as devoted followers of Jesus. Thanks for joining us. We invite you to listen in. All right, welcome to the Young Decatur podcast. My name is Abby. I am the hostess with the mostest. And I have joining me today our pod pastor, Thomas Hagen.
Hello.
And we have our producer, the cool happening cat. I don't know about that, but
cat.
Logan Ray. And we have our first ever podcast guest.
What?
Our podcast, I don't know. Andrea Grunden is here.
Hello.
And she is going to talk to us about the Enneagram. And we are so excited that you're going to share with us. And so Andrea's going to do a little bit of an overview of each number, kind of like rapid fire, just to kind of give us a baseline of what we're talking about. And then we're going to ask her some questions. So
yeah, Andrea. So
awesome.
What's the Enneagram? What are these numbers we're going to talk about?
So just basically the Enneagram is a personality tool. And there are a lot of personality tests and things out there. This is one of them. And we'll get probably later into some of the benefits of them, but I'm going to run down the numbers. This is very, very, overview information. So if you want more, there's a whole ton of stuff out there. YourEnneagramCoach.com has a lot of great information. The Road Back to You is a great book that's all about this, but I'll run through these briefly to give you an overview, but know that there's so much depth and information beyond this. So the Enneagram ones, these are people who are called the improvers. They tend to be conscientious. They're very orderly. They're very appropriate, very ethical, always asking the question like, what is right? What is good? Sometimes people refer to them as the perfectionists, but they have like a core fear of being wrong or bad or evil or inappropriate. And really their core desire is to be integritous, to know that they're good and that they're ethical and that they're balanced, and being right is being in the right, or being right is really a high value for them. And then we have number 2, who is often referred to as the helper. They're very thoughtful. They're very generous people. They're sometimes people pleasing, which can be a good or a bad thing. They have the ability kind of to walk in the room and just kind of assess the mood and the tone and to know what each person needs in that space. But their core fear is being rejected or unwanted or being thought as worthless or needy. And their desire really is to be appreciated and loved and to know that they're wanted. Then we have the 3. This is the achiever. And so these are people who are highly efficient. They're very accomplished. They're very, very motivated and driven. These are probably people who have like a shelf of trophies at home from all their accomplishments, maybe walls full of like, their diplomas and all their other achievements. But these are highly productive people. They're really great. But their core fear is being exposed or thought of as incompetent or inefficient or worthless. And so failing to appear successful can be a real fear for them. And really their desire is they want to have a high status. They want to be respected and admired. They want to be successful and thought of as valuable. And then we come to the 4. These are the individualists. These people tend to be really authentic and creative. They're very expressive and very deep, sometimes also temperamental. Their core fear is being inadequate or like not having emotions or being mundane or defective, flawed, insignificant. They often feel like that they're other from everybody else. They feel left out. And really their desires, they want to be unique. And I say special, but not like they want to be treated as special. They just want to know that their gifts are unique and special and they're authentic in themselves and that they're valued as that. Then we come to the 5. These people are the investigators. They're highly perceptive people. They're very insightful and intelligent. Sometimes they tend to be a little bit detached and isolated. These people they're not always like introverted people, like who are off by themselves, but they do love to research. They love to find information and kind of go down that path. And often that leads them to being kind of a little bit by themselves. But their core fear is being like annihilated or invaded, like basically having people infringe on their time and the amount of like resources they have to offer. These people usually start out with like a low amount of what they feel like they have to give people, whether that's time or energy, and they can feel like they're going to be depleted by other people. Their desire is to be knowledgeable, for people to see them as capable, as confident, as having the answers, as being very aware of what's going on and knowing the answer to things. So that's the 5. Then we have the 6s. These are the loyalists. These people are incredibly committed. They're really responsible. They're faithful. As the name suggests, they're incredibly loyal. Sometimes what comes along with the 6, though, is anxiety and fear. And so their core fear is that sometimes they're afraid of fear itself. Like, what might happen to me? What could happen? They want a sense of security or guidance, and they're afraid to kind of all the things that might happen, being abandoned, or things that might physically happen to them or emotionally happen to them. And so really their core desires, they want to have security, they want to have guidance, they want to have support, kind of that same kind of loyalist that they give to other people. They kind of want that for themselves as well. And then we have the 7. These people are the enthusiasts, and they're very playful, they're very excitable, they're very versatile. They tend to look forward to what's in the future. They love to plan things and to look forward to big events. These people tend to be kind of the life of the party. They always get something going that's around them. And they're really, like, these people are super fun to be around. There's always an adventure that's happening that's kind of around a 7. Their fear is like being trapped in emotional pain. They love the positive emotions, but are really fearful of like the negative emotions, or they don't want to be limited or bored or missing out on fun things, or that kind of like adventure is really a big thing. And their core desire is to be happy, to be fully satisfied, to be content. And then we have the 8s, the challenger. These people are incredibly assertive. They're very self-confident. Sometimes they're very intense. But interestingly enough, even though that's the persona they put off, they're really big-hearted. Like, these are people who tend to be very soft on the inside. And they're people who, they care very much about people, but they're also like the protector. They're the people who, they stand up for those who are powerless. And their fear is actually being weak or powerless, being harmed or controlled or even manipulated. And so that's a big fear for them. And their desire is to protect themselves and those people who are in their inner circle. They're the ones who stand up for injustice and aren't afraid to take on the big organization or the big injustice or whatever for people. And then finally we come to the 9. Man, this is a lot of information, isn't it?
Yes, you are doing an amazing job.
Yeah, the Enneagram's a really complicated thing. But yeah, let's hear about this last type.
All right, so the 9, these are the peacemakers. These people are incredibly thoughtful. They're reassuring. They're very receptive. They can be very accommodating. One Enneagram teacher calls them like the darlings of the Enneagram, like, or the sweethearts, because people just love them. They connect with other people. They're really, really great. But their core fear is like being in conflict. So we all hate conflict, but there's something about being in conflict or having tension or discord, feeling shut out or overlooked. These are all things that are really concerning for them. Losing connection with others is a huge fear. And so what they really desire is like an inner stability, a peace of mind, the ability to have their whole world at peace, everything to be at right is kind of what they desire. And so in an effort to do that, oftentimes you'll see them, they seem like they're like a whole lot of the other types. That's because they do this thing called merging, where they look a lot like the other types. But that's also what makes them incredibly endearing to people, is people are like, they're great listeners. I feel really like I can connect with them. So those are the 9.
So there's years of understanding the Enneagram boiled down into just like less than, probably 5 minutes. I don't even know how long that was. But before we go on, because I do want to hear what your guys' Enneagram type is, if you struggled to figure out what it was. Just a reminder, this podcast is going to make more sense to you if you know what your Enneagram type is. So what's a good place if they want to pause and go see what their Enneagram type is? Where should they go check that out, Andrea?
So you can go to yourenneagramcoach.com and they have a free test that you can take. I will say this about the test, though, is that it'll give you a lot of information. Like, it might say that you're like 80% of 4 and like 30% a 6, and then 20% a 2. And that's a lot of information that you might not understand. So you can take the test to give you a good starting point. But from there, you want to dive a little deeper, either with the information that's on your Enneagram coach. They also have podcasts there. And then The Road Back to You is actually a really great starting point. It's a book that's by Ian Morgan Cron. He also has a podcast called Typology. And these are two really great resources for diving a little bit deeper with that.
Yeah, and everyone I know who's really good at the Enneagram or has a great understanding of it always says, listen, the test is helpful, but it's a starting point for you to process which numbers to research to see what you really are. So be wise. And again, we talked about this before the podcast. It's a tool. This doesn't define you. All the negative things that come with each type or each positive thing that comes with a type, those don't define you. These are just tools for how different kinds of people perceive the world. So with that said, can we share our Enneagram types? Could we start with Abby? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think my Enneagram journey started a couple years ago when I listened to a podcast by your Enneagram coach. What is her name? I can't remember. Beth McCord. Yeah. She was on a podcast and I listened to her just share pretty much the same information that you just shared. And I could not figure out what number I was. And then it took a lot of study into each number to really figure out that I am a 2. I am a helper. I have a fear of failing people, which my 3 wing, which we can talk about that as well. Like my 3 wing is really strong. So I do not like failing, but I really hate to fail other people. I'm a big people pleaser. So yeah. What about you, Logan? What's your number?
I am a 6 wing 5, which I've only met one other person that's that, and it was in the back of a van. Fun fact. So we're in special places. It's hard to find
that
us.
Sounds like a really interesting story.
Yeah. I saw this like really cool sign ad for like free candy or something like that. And I was like, sign me up.
Come into my van. I'm
and then we figured out we're the same Enneagram type.
That's really funny because we didn't talk about this beforehand. I'm actually a 6 wing 5.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you guys meet in the back of a van?
It was Thomas, wasn't it?
Yeah, I had a mask on, so I can't really tell. But
I'm not as confident with my wing. So wing just means the type next to you take on characteristics of that, and you can shift back and forth, I believe. But so yeah, 6, which I think is typically called, what do they call it now? The
loyalist. Yep.
So the person who's loyal to what they've committed to. I actually understood being a 6. I learned it through the framework of being a skeptic, because that's another form of the 6.
Yep.
And a skeptic, that resonated with me because I have lots of questions. I have to feel good about processing my questions, and then I can make decisions.
Absolutely.
And when I don't have that figured out, I am actually at discord. And then the wing 5 thing for me is just, that's the person who likes to get away on their own and study, which is funny. I think it surprises people because I'm pretty outgoing. I might be what they call an outgoing introvert, where I'm actually introverted. I get energy from being alone, but I love being around people.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I could be an ambivert. I've gone back and forth. And again, like, these things don't define us. They're just helpful tools, but
a little side just tidbit is that traditionally we think of like introvert and extrovert as just like you're either all one or all the other, but it's really more of like a spectrum that you're on.
Absolutely.
And so you can find a lot of people who like maybe they're hardcore introverts, which of course means like they get their energy from being alone, but they might be all the way on one end. But you'll find a lot of people who are in the middle that even though they get their energy from being alone, they really enjoy conversing and connecting with people. And the same thing on the other side with extroverts, people who get their energy by being out and about with people, but they really also need that kind of alone time, that they enjoy being by themselves a little bit as well. So it's really more of like a spectrum than it is like you're either one or the other, if that makes sense.
And like most like personality tools, like you can change over time, but the Enneagram is unique that you don't really change numbers, correct?
Your core doesn't change. What you'll see, and this is one of the things that I actually love about the Enneagram as opposed to some other personality tools, is that it's not just this is who you are. A lot of personality tools will describe you, but they don't talk about how you change or how you grow, or they don't talk about how you are in health or in unhealth. And really the Enneagram shows that, how am I in health? And then how do I move, or unhealth, and how do I move towards health? What does a healthy version of my number look like? And it shows you kind of the path and the things to do in order to find that space. And not the other personality tools, that can be useful for things, but it doesn't show you the path for growth.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's an interesting thing. So it shows that whenever you're in a time of stress or in a time of health, you actually gravitate towards characteristics of other types. So as a 6, when I'm at good health, I actually gravitate towards number 9, the peacemaker, because if I've processed my decisions, I take on peace, and that becomes a real core part of my identity. And I love when I'm feeling that way. Still asking questions, but I'm at peace about it. And then there are types that have a lot of crossover. I have some really close friends, and one of them who's actually I would say, outside of you, Andrea, is the only other person I know who's an expert in the Enneagram. He's challenged me. He's like, I think you're a 1 because of your moral perfectionism. You want to see goodness in the world. You want to be a representative of moral goodness. And I actually thought I was a 1 for a long time, but after taking some tests and reading a lot of literature, I was like, man, actually, I think I'm a 6 because it had to do, I'm more mind focused. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The other interesting thing is that, a lot of these have some, like you said, some crossover. And then the why behind it might be, so you are maybe committed to being right and good, and the that being that representative of moral goodness, or what I would say, you would say what Christ calls us to, but it's not necessarily the motivation of I want to be right or I have to be right, but you have a loyalty to what you've researched, what you've looked to, and what you've committed your life to. And so the motivations is really, you can see the same actions in a lot of numbers, but the motivation is what is a little bit different depending on what number you might be.
Yeah, another thing too, I think this is kind of a side thing, but I think I'm also a 6 because I question my confirmation bias a lot. So even though I'm confident in what I believe and know, I will say, wait, what are my presuppositions here? And that probably comes from many years of evangelizing and many years of trying to just seek humility and be like, I don't know it all. So just because I'm loyal to something doesn't mean I don't ask questions about it. It's again, it's very complicated. These are very helpful tools. But I slip into my wing 7 sometimes, which is that enthusiastic, outgoing person. And honestly, that's probably why, Logan, you're like, oh, I didn't know you were wing 5. And I think I'm wing 5, but I slip into wing 7 sometimes. So maybe I am six wing 7. I'm not sure, but
yeah, there's one of the teachers that I've heard talks about you need both wings to fly. And so you utilize both of maybe the tools that are each in the sides, that the wings that you have. So for whatever number you are, it's the number on either side. And you utilize both of those. So I'm an Enneagram 4.
Okay.
And
tell us about your Enneagram. Sorry.
So I'm an Enneagram 4, the individualist, which, funny story, if you ever want to know what type you are, it's probably the one that you read through and you're like, ugh, I don't want to be that. Because that was totally my experience. I was read through the 4 and I was like, man, at least I'm not that. And then I was like, oh crap, I really am that. And so that was one of those things though, that you read these darker, the darker side of it, or the weaknesses and the fears and the things that aren't great about you. And you really you can kind of see those in yourself and identify with them. But I'm a 4. And so I tend to lean a little more towards 5. Research and study. I mean, the reason I'm probably an Enneagram, I wouldn't say expert, but person who knows a lot is because I've read lots of books. I've studied a lot because I'm very interested in that. And I can tell you a whole lot of things in art about different types of paper that you would use, because I go down these rabbit holes of research and stuff. But, when I'm doing things up front, I was a teacher and I've done some teaching and things before. I really lean into heavily that 3-wing, that achiever that kind of pulls things together, that's polished, that kind of enjoys the idea of being up front and presenting and sharing things with people. So it really depends on the situation. I probably lean a little bit more one way, but you can see both of those characteristics really come out depending on the situation where you find yourself.
And another thing I think is really interesting about the individualists, the 4, is that they're often artists.
Yeah.
And you're very much an artist. And actually, when I learned the Enneagram, I learned it from a framework that was slightly different. Because again, I didn't learn about the loyalist. I learned about the skeptic. And then they didn't label the number 4 an idealist. They labeled them an artist. And so when you first told me you're a 4, I'm like, of course you're a 4. Because Andrea at our church runs the Arts Academy. She literally teaches dozens of kids, or orchestrates classes for dozens of kids to learn culinary arts, learning fabric arts, visual art, painting, and things of that nature. Also music and choir. Like that's a big thing. Like, and you're an artist yourself. You have all kinds of art around your desk that you have made. There's paintings of yours on the walls at the church. Like, so tell us, like how does being an individualist play into being an artist?
So I think like a core desire for the 4 is this desire to create. Like, 4s have a lot of depth. In fact, that's was also another characteristic was, I can go really deep with things. I can feel very, very deeply, and I think very, very deeply, and kind of out of that sense of exploring pain, exploring difficult things, there's this sense of I want to create something beautiful out of it. And so a natural output or outlet for that is through artistic means. I think that's why, if you look at a lot of songwriters or people who create these different things, you'll find a lot of 4s. There are also 9s, and there are a lot of other numbers, but out of that, 4s have this kind of sense of loss or depth of pain that they've experience, not necessarily because they've had tragic things, but they process the world kind of through a lens of depth, and they see brokenness and it affects them very deeply. But then the gift is that they can take that and turn it into something beautiful. One of the, even though I create artwork, the other thing is sometimes just listening to people's stories and being able to point out a perspective of you maybe saw this as a difficult point in your life, but how is it that God could have used this, or what came out of this that is beautiful, is something that, I don't know if I'd call myself gifted in, but something that I want to do for other people is help them see that.
Yeah. And could you tell us, that's kind of one of the 4's superpowers. What are the superpowers of each number?
Yeah.
Oh, right. That's a good question.
So 1s are ones are conscientious, and Thomas, you mentioned this, that moral goodness, that they want to be good, and they have this ability to see what is good and right, and have a confidence in pursuing what that is. And of course, any superpower can also be an issue as well, but that's something really great that 1s bring to that. A lot of times they tend to be really organized, and so on a team, they're the ones who are detailed and organized, and they bring that to us. And really that sense of right and wrong, they, in some ways they can kind of be a watchdog for us, especially if you're thinking in the church or something like that, your 1s are always going to let you know, where are we at, or ask the questions of where are we at? Are we doing the right thing? Are we on the right path? Cool. Those are really good things. 2s, like I was saying before, they have this ability to walk into a room and they sense the mood and the tone of the room. And they have the ability to just know what people need. It's kind of crazy.
2s are always the best helpers. They just they come into a situation for an individual or a group, and they just help.
Yep. And they know what to do. It's funny because some of us stand there and we're just kind of twiddling our thumbs. We're we don't really know what to do, how to help. And a 2 often just senses what people need and are able to meet that. 3s are just, 3s have the ability to achieve and to get things done and to produce things. And they are incredibly hard workers and incredibly productive, which again, our superpowers can be our kryptonite as well.
Yeah, exactly.
But having them on your team, they're going to be shooting for what would be good. What can we produce? What can we create? What can we move forward in? And they're also going to be a great face of an organization, because they're going to be that person that relates to other people, that has that ability to connect.
Charismatic too.
Very charismatic. 4s, we talked a little bit about that. Their creativity, and also I think their ability to take pain and to take difficult situations and turn them into something beautiful, or to share with people something beautiful out of that.
Yeah, if you're grieving, you want a 4 to sit in sadness with you.
Because the truth is, like, a lot of numbers feel uncomfortable with like sad things or difficult things or loss. And 4s don't feel like they have to fix it. A lot of times 4s can just sit and just be with you. And that can be one of the greatest gifts for someone, because someone in pain or with a sense of loss or grief, they don't necessarily just want you to make it better. They really want someone to just sit and be with them. And 4s have that incredible ability. 5s, these are your like expert people. Like, I know a couple of 5s, and they're kind of like your go-to people on certain topics. One of them is like an expert in like organization, like getting things done, and like
someone comes to mind
someone
that
comes
we all
to mind.
work with.
But like just has this, they have this depth of knowledge. It's usually like in one particular way. Abby, I think you also have a 5 in your life as well.
Caleb would be so sad if I went through a podcast and did not talk about him. He's like, oh, you didn't talk about me in the last
What's
podcast.
his area of expertise, though?
It's trains, yes. We all know that he is an expert on trains, but he is an Enneagram 5.
He's also an engineer and just a really smart dude and researches things.
Yep. And 6 they have this ability to kind of like look down the road and see where the issues might be, because they tend to have
that, Logan.
Yeah.
Bro, I feel that. I'm like, people's like, here's our plan. I'm like, here's the problems.
Yep.
I have to reel it in, actually.
So good. You are going to die.
And I, like, again, superpower kryptonite, like it can be all the same thing, but like it really can be a huge benefit for you to lay something out, and for a 6 to be able to see, I can see like this is where this pothole might be, or this is where this part of the plan might fall apart. And that information can be so useful when we listen to it and we do it well. And for 6s in that space, it can like, setting that out is really good, but then also being willing to trust that some things you can plow through and the worst case scenario won't happen and it's okay. 7s have that sense of spirit and adventure. They have an ability to bring people together and to get them excited, and sometimes to get them to do things that you would never imagine that you would do.
They're like the traditionally fun person. They're the person who walks in the room like, we're all going to have fun now.
Yeah.
Nick Mayberry.
And
we all want to be like Nick Mayberry.
He is fantastic. The really great thing about Nick too is that, like, despite the stereotype of the 7 always being like the life of the party, Nick has an incredible depth as well to like be a great listener and to connect with people really well. And I think that healthy 7s do that. Like, they have that adventurous spirit and can make you feel better, but they'll also connect with you really well, and on things that you might not even imagine you might connect with.
Yeah, and just for those of you who are jumping in, Nick's a friend of ours who he's super fun. He plans a lot of fun things for us. He preaches at Young Decatur, our local ministry, a lot.
And he's your roommate.
And he's my roommate. I have a lot of fun with Nick.
And you have that conflict with him with the trash can.
Oh yeah, from the conflict episode. Yeah, he was like, Thomas, it's not a big deal. He was totally right. You have to listen.
He has fun,
The conflict episode, we actually didn't name him in that. I chose not to, but now it's public.
Now I know.
But honestly, it's okay because Nick was the hero in that story and I was the ridiculous one. So it's fine.
As usual.
Yeah, for real though. What are you going to say, Logan?
7s are definitely major golden retriever energy people.
Yeah, fun. Let's do it. But at the same time, a 7, like, something I've seen that's dangerous with some 7s is they're really people are really attracted to them, and like they have to be careful with that.
Yeah.
Like they have to like guard themselves. Like they have to know when to like have space, like, because they're not just some token of having fun.
Yeah. And I think that is something helpful for us to all like recognize when you're interacting with different numbers, is that we have these sense of who they are and like their personality and like what's out there, but we want to be careful to remember like individuals as well, like, and that it's more than just what this token ideal is of that particular number. 8s are the challenger, and these are phenomenal people. They're natural leaders. Like when they speak, people listen. They are really quick decision makers. Like, and sometimes that can be like a problem, but they feel like they come to a decision, they make it, and then we move on with it. And they have that natural leadership that is really, really good. And then peacemakers, I know a few 9s, and one of them, like, she's just someone you just want to sit and you want to talk to, and you know that she's going to listen. You feel connected with them. That peacemaker thing really comes out. I have a member of my family who's a 9, and it's funny because you look at the kind of people like who are her friends, and it's so diverse. Like, it's such a diverse group of people because they are just have this ability to get along with everybody, and the connections are genuine. They're not like, she collects random people. There are genuine connections, but she's able to connect with all these different people, and it's really a beautiful thing.
I think some of my closest friends are 9s, and like, I love them dearly. And then I also do not understand them at all, because 9s, I think, are just one of the most complex numbers in the Enneagram, because like you said earlier, they can come across as they just are so moldable. Like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's just so interesting to me that I like can understand them, but also can't understand them. But also, like, do you find that like somebody that has the same number as you, do you find that you normally have conflict with somebody that's so similar?
You can. I think it really, all that depends on the health of a number. Gotcha. I've heard a lot of questions on different podcasts and stuff of like which numbers are best together. And I think while there are some maybe natural things that can arise where one number doesn't fully understand the other, if both people are healthy, like emotionally healthy, mentally healthy, spiritually healthy, all numbers can really get along really well, even numbers that are similar. I think it's kind of funny. 4s, wanting to be the individualist and specialist will always like question whether other people are really 4s. Like, so you'll be like, I'm a 4. And then people will be like, are you really? Like 4s will be like, are you really though? Like, so there's that, like that kind of funny tension of that. But I really think that sometimes unhealthy though can really spiral out of control. I had a friend in college who was also a 4, and this is before I knew the Enneagram. And I think that our unhealth of 4ness kind of spiraled us into a bad place. Like our friendship wasn't great. It could have been great, but it wasn't, because both of us were unhealthy in some of the ways that we behaved, some of the ways we thought, some of the ways we interacted. And that really spiraled us out of control because it kind of fed off of each other. But that again, I have some other friends like 4s who it's an incredibly healthy relationship because both of us are very self-aware and know kind of the warning signs in our relationship of when one of us is moving towards a place of unhealth.
Fun fact for everyone, Andrea is my mentor, which is awesome.
And her husband is my mentor, actually. So I literally had a get to a mentoring one-on-one meeting with him today, actually, this morning.
He's a great guy.
I like him a lot.
Really fond of him.
I like him too.
Shout out to Jonathan.
Shout out to Pastor Jonathan.
But we have like Enneagram talks a lot because whenever I remember this specifically, I was going through a tough time and I felt like I just had a whole bunch of unhealthy 4s in my life that were just like really like I couldn't figure out why I was having this conflict. And so I asked Andrea, I was like, do 2s and 4s like have conflict? And you were like, well, it's more about the unhealth. Any number that's unhealthy can really have, we can have conflict with any number, but how do we like handle conflict with certain numbers? Like, is there a certain way to like best, how do we best love like our brother and sister in Christ that's this number when we're having conflict with them?
And and I just want to throw in there, like this is why this is important as a Christian, is like we're not just talking about like getting along with people. It's not just teams and using this in a like professional setting. We're trying to figure out how we take our spiritual brothers and sisters and how we love and care for them the best. How do we put them first? How do we work on that relationship? How do we really honor them? And that's why I actually think that's why the Enneagram is important. See, like people like this, us four in this room, we all work together. So there's that dynamic, but we're also brothers and sisters in Christ, which is a more important dynamic. And I think that that's something that's why this is a helpful tool. I mean, there's general things, be nice to everybody, right? But like, I would love to hear some specific stuff too. Conflict with different groups.
So I want to say, first of all, that one of the best things you can do to love other people well is to be self-aware, is to understand your failings, understand your flaws, maybe the place where you go off the rails, because we all do. And that's one of the things, the Enneagram in some ways is like a mirror. There's that passage in James that talks about like looking into a mirror and then going away and not recognizing yourself. Right. And for me, like my personal story is that the Enneagram has really in a lot of ways been a mirror for me, which was a non-judgmental way. As a 4, I also can be temperamental and moody and sensitive. I'm admitting that out. So that can make me defensive when I would have sometimes, to have conversations with Jonathan, and he would be like, hey, is this really the way you want to interact with the kids and stuff? And of course I always take that super graciously. Okay. I don't at all. I get really annoyed. But when I saw myself with the Enneagram, it was like someone could say to me, hey, these are some things that are issues for you, without it being judgmental, because I read it in a book. It wasn't like the book was out to get me. And it was a way for me to see myself, like looking into a mirror and going, okay, these are things I'm aware of now and they have to change, or they don't, but that's not really a great choice. If I'm a follower of Christ and I believe these things, then what I'm seeing has to change. And so that, I think is step 1, is knowing yourself, knowing your number, knowing where your motivations are, like what is it that's motivating you? And then the healthy and unhealthy practices that kind of flow out from that is super important. And then recognizing other people and how we show them grace. With ones in conflict, it's important to remember that for ones, they do have that sense of being right. They want to have right and wrong. The other characteristic about one that we haven't mentioned yet is they have kind of this inner critic. Yeah. And the inner critic is constantly going in their head. It's berating them. It's like that little mistake, like that spelling error on this particular thing really drives them nuts. It's like they shouldn't have done that. It was really bad. And when the critic is really bad, it gets really like it plays over and over again in their heads. And I think it's something hard for us to understand, because ones can sometimes come across as like critical, like, this isn't right, that isn't wrong, there's this mistake, there's that mistake. And some of us are like, can it just be good enough? Like, why do we have to point that out? But for them, like that's just what's playing constantly in their head. And so having the grace to maybe, if you have conflict, to listen. I think listening for any number is really important, but especially to listen, and then to come graciously to talk about what might be something and how can I help, or what maybe can I do?
I have a funny story to say, because I'm a 2, but you need both your wings to fly. So I do have an inner critic. And yesterday we had a staff retreat, and there was this moment where Jonathan was like, let's have a dance party. And I'm like, oh yeah, I can show off my dance skills. So I started.
It was epic, by the way.
I started to do these like crazy moves. Like, I haven't done these moves in years, and I'm a little sore this morning because of them. And after it was over,
it was only 30 seconds.
I know, but you obviously didn't see the dance.
No, you didn't.
And afterwards, Jonathan was like, wow, like everybody was, but he starts talking to us about rest, and like, for the next like 10 minutes, all I could think about was like, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. Man, people are going to think you're weird. Like, I can't believe you did that. Like,
just because the executive pastor, our boss, said to you.
Pastor Jonathan Grunden.
Well, it was kind of like a collective, and people were laughing, and even like, no, that was hilarious. That was great. But I was like,
you got self-conscious, huh?
Yeah. And then I just like went into my mind, and the inner critic was like, I don't know how many times I'll have a conversation with somebody, and I'll leave that conversation picking apart every single thing that I said, every like eye contact that they made. Did they turn away from me? Were they really listening to me? Do they really care? Like, all these different things. the inner critic will talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not know that. Well, not that I didn't know that not everybody has that when I learned about the Enneagram, but I was like, oh my goodness, like this makes sense.
Yeah. And fours often have it too. Twos, one and fours. Though the difference is the ones is like constantly playing. There's never like a time where it's like, settle
Turned
down.
off.
Like, turned off, that it's constantly in there. So that's one, like really approaching them with grace, and then and being aware that they've probably beat themselves up over whatever that might have been 10 times as many times as you did. And being willing to have grace for that. Twos are,
Tell me about it.
well, the great thing about twos is that they're sensitive, and in a good way, like because they can sense other people's needs and other people's emotions and stuff. But it can also mean that when you're approaching a two with conflict, you want to know that the relationship is so important to them. Like being wanted, being loved, that connection, like the severing of a connection for a two is really, really tough, because they really do care about people. They love and they want to be loved. And so when you approach conflict with a two, you want to first have, like, again, compassion. We should probably just say that for all of them. You want to have compassion. But I think for a two, you want to like be positive and upbeat, like kind of the sandwich, if you've ever heard of the compliment sandwich. Yes. Like tell them what you love about them, address the issue, and the issue as an objective thing, not subjective. Like, this is the thing that happened that I felt hurt by, but not you are the problem that I feel hurt by. And then, remind them that they're loved.
Remind us how much you love us at the very end.
This reminds me too of like, this is more, kind of goes back to the one thing, but also just to be careful not to mistype people.
Yeah.
And also just because someone's struggling with something doesn't mean like, now I know what type they are. Like, Thomas
use it against them.
Yeah, actually a lot of people, I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but a lot of people typed me as a one because I was really struggling with an internal critic. And it took me some time to process, actually, because I was like, because I realized I wasn't struggling with this internal critic because it was a moral dilemma, like right or wrong. It was more so trying to figure out the right decision. Yeah. And it wasn't so moral. And actually that was going through that time in my life, which was like 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, actually was how I figured out, I'm like, I'm actually not a 1. I'm probably a 6. But I think it's very easy for us to start typing people and saying, well, they're doing that because they're a 4.
Yeah.
Or they're doing that because they're a 5. No wonder they're off by themselves doing this all the time. Like, you might be misreading it. Like, people are more complicated than these numbers.
Absolutely.
I remember I think you taught our staff about the Enneagram. I think it was like a year or 2 ago. Mm-hmm. And I remember Pastor Brian coming up to me and being like, so Abby, what number do you think I am? And I'm like, that is the worst question you could ever ask me, because I don't want to, like, if I mistype you, I mean, if I say like, oh, you're this, well, is that because you think I'm And so I was like, are you a 3? Because you're a great leader. It's like, no, guess again. And I'm like, oh, please don't do this to me.
This is like probably the worst thing you could do to a 2 too. Yeah. As well. And actually, just like on that note, Thomas, I almost quit the Enneagram like a while ago, studying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember this.
I like first learning about this, it was really, like, again, super helpful. These things are very deep and complex though. And off the bat, you see some character traits or some behaviors from people and you're like, oh, that means that they're this number. But a lot of times there are a lot of complexities and you can't really determine someone's motivations. And that's what the numbers are based on, is their motivation. And so I totally went around, I'm like, I would teach and I'm like, my husband's a 6. And so blah, 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 blah. And so I talked about how Jonathan was a 6. And so we did this marriage thing together with the Enneagram. And he's like, I'm a 2. And I'm like, no, you're not. Which don't ever tell somebody like, no, you're not that number. I was like, no, you're not. You're totally a 6. He's like, no, I'm a 2. And I was like, what? And so I had this huge crisis where I was like, do I not know my husband well enough to know what number he is? Does he not share deeply enough with me? Do I not know the Enneagram? I literally used him as an example.
Which is like probably the worst thing you could do for a 4, right?
Probably, yes. I was like, do I even know you? So like all that to say, now my story is please be careful when you decide that you're going to type people. Anyway, so like 3s in conflict, I think one of the things that's interesting about a 3 is they have this chameleon-like ability, which can be an incredible thing. Like they can talk to almost anybody because they have this sense of what people want to hear or what they want to like, what they're expecting when you're talking to them. And sometimes what makes it very difficult is you're not really sure, like you have this conversation with a 3 and you're like, I don't know, like, is that like what I'm getting the real thing? 3s have a difficult time actually being vulnerable with people. And so you just want to be aware of that fact when you're in relationship and with a conflict with a 3. Again, like compassion and gentle, but you do want to talk about like what you feel and what you're experiencing from them so that there's an understanding of how that's affecting. And honestly, a lot of times, even though 3s can pick up on what other people feel, like, because that's one of the things they use in order to communicate with people, they have a hard time understanding what they feel. And that can be a really crucial thing because sometimes in conflict, they're not even aware of how they feel or what's going on with that. 4s, 4s are sensitive as well. So also 4s have a fear of abandonment. And that's a very real thing. And so reassuring a 4 that the conflict doesn't mean abandonment is important because I think a lot of, speaking from personal experience, a lot of times like conflict to me is like, well, I better bail before someone bails on me. And unfortunately, I have like a string of maybe some broken relationships in my past that I wish that I had been mature enough to know that conflict didn't equal abandonment or the end of the relationship, but to handle that in a healthy manner. And so I think 4s, especially, they might be a little annoyed at first or moody about it at first, but they'll come back around because they think very deeply and they process their feelings. And so even something that you tell them would be good. And then consistency in that relationship. Because even though they might be up and down riding the waves of emotion, consistency is important. 5s,
give them the facts.
Honestly, probably utilizing facts is important, but I think it's also important for 5s to know how you feel about something. Like for you to explain, this is the way that it made me feel, or this is the way that I experienced that. Because honestly, they live a lot in facts and in numbers and that type of thing. And conflict is usually is personal. It involves feelings or it involves like actions or some kind of breaking or hurt. And so if that's the case, you can communicate clearly and objectively about something, but it's also important to remind them like, this is how it felt or why this was a concern for me. Thomas, actually 6s, maybe you or Logan should jump in on like, how is it best for like someone to approach you when there's conflict involved?
Yeah, I think for me, I need time. So not even time. I need space to think it through. You just dropped a bomb on me. If you've come to me with conflict and I see that you're right, I will have already processed that possibility in my mind. And so for me, I immediately apologize and say, yep, what you have said is correct. And what I did is inconsistent with what I've processed. Therefore, I'm sorry. If someone says to me, you've done this and I'm not, and I don't understand the reasoning why, I probably have questions. I probably want to be like, why is this a thing? Why is this an issue? So for me, I guess I could be defensive, but I don't know. It's hard to say because I've worked a long stretch of my life, dealing with how I process conflict. And I try to be someone who forgives quickly and forgives often. Forgiveness, now granted, I haven't had to forgive some things. I haven't had to forgive some of the grievous things that other people have had to face in life. But for me, where I'm at in life right now, like I've just had to forgive a lot and I'm okay with it. Like I just forgive people. I've experienced the freedom of what it means to forgive people. Yeah. And so that might displace me from my number a little bit. But what would be a more, how have you understood how 6s take conflict?
Well, I think you made an important point, and I think it's true for 4, 5s, and 6s, is that all of them have kind of that thinking or processing piece. 4s process their emotions, and then 5s like think through what they feel and or think through something, and then 6s also have a lot of that processing that happens. And and I think that it's important to remember that when we bring something to like a 5, a 4 or 5 or a 6, that we want to give them time. Like we want to give them time to think about it, to process it. Like and Logan, I think to your point, like you want someone to bring it before you instead of like letting it fester or be out there.
Right,
and but then to give you space to like, okay, what's true about this, what's not, what was the misunderstanding. And then probably I would also say, Thomas, to your point, that another thing to remember with 6s is like communicating like a why can be really important. Like that we have this conflict and here's why I think this might have happened, or here's why I reacted this way, can be super helpful, because that gives you the opportunity to ask questions or to fully understand where the disconnect might lie. And of course, there are lots of different types of conflict. Like there's work conflict, there's personal conflict, that, there's all of these kinds of things. But I think allowing the opportunity for process, for you to process, and then to be able to say, okay, now I understand. Now what do we do to move through past this is, I think, important.
Yeah. I think that's definitely true. I think the process time is very nice. And then, like you said, the why factor of explaining that is also just as important, because not just the skeptic side, but also the loyalist side. So if, like what you're saying, Thomas, is like, if we are wrong, we aren't afraid to admit that we are wrong, but we want to, say like, oh, I am wrong and I don't want to be wrong to you. Let's make this right. I think that's the important part too, is that we want to make sure that whatever's happened is being treated in fairness and is coming out right in the end of it.
Yeah.
So we need those whys to be able to say, so XYZ happened, let's figure that out so that we can make it correct.
I think there's maybe, and maybe I'm just speaking from my own experience, but I think that we have some extra layers of processing going on. It's not just emotional. There's an intellect to it, to our conflict resolution.
Yeah. So one of the interesting other things about the Enneagram is that each of the 9 numbers are divided into 3 triads. And so 2, 3, and 4 are in a triad, 5, 6, and 7, and then 7, 8, and 9. And the 2, 3, and 4 are the heart triad. And all that means is that their initial processing of the world or what's going on around them is emotional. And so they, it's about what they feel like. That's their first go-to. And they don't all, 2, 3s, and 4s don't all process it the same. 2s are going to process through the lens of how other people feel, not necessarily themselves. 3s will often bury the emotion. So they'll feel it, but then they just bury it and move on with achieving things. And 4s are going to feel it deeply and process how it affects them. And so that's, each of them processes differently. 5, 6s, and 7s are actually the head triad. And so your initial reaction as a 5, 6, or a 7 to what's going on in the world is thinking, like to process through. So 5s are always going to take in, and it might be like a significant like wound or a conflict, but the first thing they're going to think is, what do I think? And that's similar thing with a 6 is, what do I think? But you're going to be processing it through all these different lenses of all these different layers of processing.
Right.
And 7s, what do I think? But then they're going to they move on pretty quickly from that. But it again starts with the head. And then 8, 9, and 1 are the gut triad. So it's going to be off of like what they like their emotional or not emotional. They're just gut reaction to something. So 8s process the world and then they just decide what they're going to do and they do it. 9s kind of bury it. They're not sure what to do. So they just like kind of move into this state of not doing anything. And sometimes for 1s, they process also with that like doing reaction, but theirs tends to be like a pushed off or a pushed down reaction where that can provide resentment or that type of thing, but it's a pushed down kind of emotional response to it.
A lot of stuff.
It is. Sorry.
A lot of stuff, man. Oh yeah, but this is like like you've studied so much of this and we've had a lot of conversations before. So again, like if you were like, I'll do the test later, some of this probably would have made more sense if you took the test, but that's okay. You can listen back. You can listen at twice speed if you need to. But maybe just briefly then, a 7, 8, and 9, how do you deal with conflict with them? One of them is really easy. We'll get to that in a moment. But what do you, 7s, conflict? What's the stereotype for them?
Well, the stereotype is often 7s will push things like down the road or the next thing, or they tend to minimize. So like even like big colossal things will be like not so big of a deal. One of the teachers I listened to said it's kind of funny that 7s she would talk to and they'd all have this like traumatic story that was in their past that was kind of like, oh, well, it was no big deal. Like my brother died when I was little. And then she's like, whoa, wait, go back to that. What did you just say? Like, and they tend to minimize,
wow.
Which can be an asset sometimes. Like sometimes some of us, of course, make emotional, mountains out of molehills, and 7s can help us bring that down. But 7s have to realize that sometimes like the minimizing of something can be really hurtful because it was big to somebody else. And so I think approaching a 7, understanding that that might be their tendency, but you need to be open and to be willing to say, look, this does really hurt, or this was kind of a big deal, and here's why. Help me understand is a really big thing. 8s are probably the ones that are conflict averse. Like they don't, conflict doesn't bother them. In fact, sometimes like 8s want that emotional intensity. So not that they're out there like, beating people up or anything, but they like kind of the combative, sparring.
I love arguing with 8s because it's just so direct.
Yeah. And it's not like they walk away and they're like, man, that was great. We had a really great conversation. And it doesn't it doesn't mess with them the way some of us others do. But with 8s, you want to be direct. They don't want you to beat around the bush. They don't want you to kind of like, they don't want filler. They want you to be direct, be kind, but be direct. And the other thing is that betrayal is a big thing for 8s. That's a big concern. They don't want to be manipulated. They don't want to have a sense that you're like talking behind their back or doing anything like that. That's a huge, huge blow to an 8. So you need to go to them directly. You need to be kind and direct, and you need to handle it. And honestly, it might be like a little bit of a back and forth, but at the end of the day, 8s respect, the ones that I've heard, 8s respect that, and that's what they want in that regard. 9s hate, like their whole thing is kind of around like avoiding conflict. I think the big thing is that you might have to pursue a 9 in order to heal the situation. And you have to know that there's a chance that they might try to hide from that, or they might try to minimize it. Like, oh, like not like a 7 does, like 9s will really have affected them, but they're like, not a big deal, like just going to leave it alone or whatever. And sometimes you actually have to probably draw that out a little bit.
Peacemakers. They're just they're going to make peace with you to a fault.
Yeah, it's fine. It's what I wanted. You're like, no, you did not want me to say that to you. But you need like, be willing to go the extra mile. And sometimes that means like, I know I have a part in this. Here's my part. Like I want to like bring this to healing again. So.
Yeah, that is great. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Yeah, thanks for letting me talk your ears off.
Yes. I feel like I need to go process everything that you've said. I'm going to listen to this podcast back many times, especially when I'm dealing with like conflict with another number or, it's just so good, like you said, to know yourself and know the people around you. Like you shouldn't just learn your number, but to learn all the numbers so that you can have better relationships with the people that you're around.
Or at the very least, realize not everyone processes like you.
Yeah.
So don't make assumptions on how someone's processing something. Keep in mind, everybody's different. And that alone, not everyone thinks like you. Not everyone feels like you. Not everyone has the same gut reactions as you. So be cautious on thinking people are processing anything good or bad the same way as you. People are God's made us all very different. We fit together. We need each other to fit together to do very unique things. So don't make assumptions. Everyone's thinking like you, feeling like you.
I think that it really comes down to, regardless of what number you are, be compassionate. Like, look at other people, thinking that what might they be going through? How are they processing? It's not the same thing as mine, like you said, Thomas. But then I would also say, I think we need to be good listeners. And actually, Thomas, this is one thing I learned from you. When I walk past you in conversations and stuff, you're an active, you are really listening, and that you want to know more. You ask good questions of people and that make that connection. And I think that that's something all of us probably need to do better, is that's the beauty of in this, is that we may think differently, but it's a great opportunity to actually ask questions and listen and to understand other people's perspectives in a different way.
Well, thank you.
All right, Andrea, what am I good at? No, thank you again, Andrea, so much for joining us. And Logan, can you tell people where they can find us at?
Absolutely. First, if you have any questions about Enneagram, leave a comment on... What am I talking about right now? Well, there's no post yet. Send us a DM on Instagram and we'll be gladly to answer that. Or if we get enough, we may have a part 2 to the Enneagram test. Dun, dun, dun.
We would love to have Andrea back.
Yes.
I'd love to come back.
Yeah, that's fun.
Give us questions, please. No. You can follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube. You can follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's all. Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah. See ya.
See ya.
Adios.
Bye-bye.